Okay, so now that we have constructed everything, everything's attached, everything looks good, now it's time for my favorite part, which is the plastering. So a few things that I go over with my students is definitely the expectations and the care for the plaster. When they're handling plaster, I always tell them be very careful with when you're getting your hands wet. The way plaster works is that you dip it in water and it gets activated. And during that activating period, you have about 30 seconds to a minute before it starts hardening. And you can even feel the temperature warming on these plaster cheesecloths. So what I do is that once I cut the plaster up, I use a cutting board to cut it. It works perfectly fine. All I do is clean it. Nothing happens to the cutting board, but I make strips anywhere between 1 to 2 inches, depending on what the surface that they're covering. They have a variety of sizes here. And what I do is when I hand it to them, always give it to them in a bucket or a tray or something like that, just because your tables will get very dirty and wet as well. So by having something underneath it, it's not going to ruin the plaster. And be sure to cover your tables because A, it will just be very easy to clean up, and B, it won't leave so much residue, especially since my tables are black. No matter how many times I clean it, it will leave like a dusty white residue behind, but with some kind of protector, it won't be as bad and it won't be as noticeable. So like I said, what students are going to do is you're going to talk to them about being mindful and being very cautious about where they're placing it and how much they're using. You don't want to add too much in the same location. The more you put in the same area, not only is it going to add weight, but it's also very wasteful as well too. And this stuff is pretty expensive. It's about $70 per box, depending on where you get it from. So essentially what they're gonna do is once the area is cleared, it's covered, and their plaster's on the tray, everyone's gonna get a bucket of water, and essentially all they do is get it wet. And the trick is once they place it, notice there's a lot of holes from the cheesecloth. You want to rub it out. So by rubbing it out, you're going to cover up all those holes in the plaster, and it's going to give you not only a finished look, but it's going to be so much easier to paint. I always tell them if you have holes in your plaster, it's going to be very difficult and it won't look as clean, and it's going to show very poor craftsmanship within the plaster itself. So just have students be very careful and just do not grab the next plaster sheet until all of your holes are covered up. So I'll zoom in here in a second, but essentially they're going to be very careful with their hands, not trying to, dip their whole hands in the water and like go straight to the plaster. You're just going to go very carefully, grab the next one, let it drip, place it, and start rubbing out all those holes. Like I said, the more they rub, the cleaner it's going to look and the nicer their painting is going to look. So I'm going to go ahead and show you some tips and tricks that I use to doing the face and the eyeballs right now. So you can see how smooth my plaster is. There's really no holes. Everything's blended out. And I'm just going to show you an example of what it looks like if you don't blend it. So once I get my next plaster, I'm going to get it wet. And you can see the difference between smooth and not smooth. And guys, it makes a huge difference. And it's not that hard to blend it out. And just within these 30 seconds of me attaching these new sheets that I've added, you can already tell that this is already hardening up and it will get warm as it's drying out. By the end of the class period, the majority of the side that you worked on will already be hard as well too. So one of the many reasons why I like plaster over paper mache is because the plaster is so easy to manipulate and change and form whatever shape you need. So let's talk about the mouth. I think that the mouth is the hardest part of the whole thing. So what you're going to do is get your plaster wet, and what you want to do is wrap it from the inside and then wrap around the lips and push it into the bottle so you can see the definition between the lips and the face. And again, by just smoothing out that plaster, you'll be able to really shape and form the lips. So a tip I told my students is not to grab another sheet of plaster until they have covered up all of the holes. So you can see me doing this step again where I lay the plaster across the mouth. I put half of it inside of the mouth so I can fold it in, push it up against the inside of the bottle, blend that area right there, and then push the bottom of the plaster into the lips to form that definition. When it comes to the teeth, I tell my students to grab one sheet of plaster and rip it in half. If needed, they can rip it smaller depending on the size of the tooth. This is the same concept as the lips. Put it in the middle of the surface and try to put as much as you can around and behind the tooth to blend out the edges and blend it into the lips of the monster. And make sure to cover up all of those holes. The ears and the rest of the monster head is the easiest part. Simply grab your plaster and wrap it around the ears and just make sure to blend it into the body. Cover up those holes. Now when it comes to the nose, the plaster is so easy to manipulate and change the shape. Watch how I lay the plaster across the nose and push the plaster into the newspaper. Then with a little bit of water on my hands, I'm simply going to blend out those holes and continue to build the shape and the form of the nose by pushing that plaster into the bottle and manipulating the plaster. I'm going to give you an example with a bigger piece of plaster. Notice how I have the nose covered and partial of the lips. By pushing and blending that plaster, I'm able to create and manipulate the plaster and give my lips and nose better definition. So in the next minute, I'm going to speed up this video and you can see how I finish blending out the plaster around the nose and the mouth and how I cover up any holes I see by manipulating and pushing the plaster into the bottle. Now let's slow down and talk about the googly eyes. I'm going to grab a piece of plaster and I'm going to fold it in half. What I'm then going to do is wrap the plaster around the top part of my eye. This is going to give the illusion of an eyelid. And this is where students can also create more of that emotion that they are trying to capture. So again, continue to blend out, use water to help cover up the holes, and then I'm going to repeat this process again for the bottom part of my eye. I grab my plaster, I fold it in half, and then I place it underneath the eyeball, and notice how the majority of my googly eye is covered up. I'm going to focus on blending and covering up those holes, and then I'm going to take my finger and open up that eye by going in a circular motion and pushing out the plaster to show more of the googly eye. Luckily, you can easily just take a piece of paper or a rag and wipe down the googly eyes once you finish designing your eyeball. Now in the next minute or so, I'm going to finish plastering the rest of my ears and the rest of my head before doing the other eye. So here we are. I'm going to slow it down again and talk about how I do the eye one more time. Grab your sheet of plaster, fold it in half, and wrap the top half of your googly eye. Make sure just a little bit is on it and the rest is around the bottle. So you can carefully now blend out those holes, push it into the surface, and then repeat the same process for the bottom half of the googly eye. Once you blend it around the eye, you can then go around the eyelid and the googly eye and push out that plaster to show more of the googly eye surface and create more of that eyelid texture. As for the rest of the video, I'm going to be finishing out plastering the rest of my monster, going back and checking all of my spots and making sure there's no holes and everything is blended out. Enjoy. Okay, art teacher friends, we are finally at the end of our session, which is the painting part. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time going over the painting techniques and things like that. I just gave kids a variety of paint brushes, and I just told them as long as you're being nice and neatly and showing good craftsmanship, you guys can paint whatever colors. The only tips and things that I provided my students was just letting them know, do they want to have their ears blended with their body and have it the same color, or do they want to show the separation with two different colors and just keeping those lines nice and clean, as well as the lips as well too. So I did have a few friends that painted the body one color and then the ears and the lips a different, just kind of like how I have on mine right here, and just having those straight lines. And I do want to talk a little bit about paint though, specifically about what type of paint you're using. The first time that I ever worked with plaster, I used tempera paint, and that was a very poor decision because I don't know what is it about the plaster and the tempera. When it dries, it likes to flick off, it like flakes. I don't know, that's like the best way to describe it. But with acrylic paint, it stays on the plaster better, and I haven't had an issue with acrylic paint. So one student painted, I do want to show you guys a trick that I do though. grab a spray bottle. I get these from Walmart. I think they're like $2, $3. And my secret recipe to making it look like a nice finish is using Mod Podge in water. Just fill it up half and half, give it a good shake, and I do like to use the glossy Mod Podge just so that it has that nice finish. And before we add anything else to it, once they are completed with the painting, I take these outside or wherever is a safe place to spray them down and literally just spray it down, let it air dry, and it is nice, good. The paint's not going to chip off, and it has just a nice finish texture to it. If you guys have followed me on Instagram, you guys have heard me talk about this a lot. I've used this for a lot of my other sculpture projects and clay projects as well to kind of give it that glaze finish. So Mod Podge, half water in a spray bottle, and it's amazing. Other than that, it really just depends on your preference on how far you want to take this project. Like I said, the kids were supposed to come back from spring break and finish with adding wigs and hairs and bringing bow ties and adding accessories from home and really giving these monsters a personality characteristic like human. So just depending on how far you want to take it, this is the most I'm going to talk about this part right here, just because you can stop at the painting or you can continue from this point on. At the end of the project, the plan was to have students write a reflection piece and have students come up with a story about their monster and give them a name, things that they like to do, and kind of come up with a narrative personality story to go along with their monster at the art show. So just some tips and ways to include some writing in your classroom. And other than that, that is the end. I hope you've enjoyed, and I cannot wait to see what you come up with. We have come to the end of our session. I hope you've enjoyed this art making class. I am so grateful for this opportunity to not only share my passion for plaster, but also give you guys the tools and techniques that I use in the classroom to turn something like this into this. If you guys made your own monster head, I would love to see your creations. Please tag me on Instagram or Twitter at ArtFunWithMissC. If you guys have any questions, or comments, or concerns, please feel free to message me on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, or even email, and I will do my best to respond as quickly as possible. I hope you've enjoyed your 2020 TAEA virtual conference, and I hope you guys have an amazing year.